Loud. Good evening, everybody. We've got Ed Gertler here, famous guidebook author, paddler extraordinaire, and he's going to take you down some rivers in France. So, Ed, take over.
Well, okay, thank you, Susan. And I say good evening to all my friends here and friends to be, and welcome you to another installment in my series of seeing the world from its rivers. Uh, Now, people often ask, what's my favorite place to paddle? What's my favorite state? What's my favorite country? Well, we'll stick to country. I'm pressed to name a favorite country, but indeed, there is one place that I have put to the test, and it's never let me down, and that's France. I think I've visited several times now. I've explored scores of its streams, probed its every corner, and I'm eager for my next visit. So, my challenge this evening is how to winnow down thousands of images and tons of anecdotes to a measly hour or so. So, here's my plan. After my first two trips in 1987 and 1988, I put together a talk for CCA. It portrayed the scene through my new and impressionable eyes, and so I thought I'd recycle it. That's what I'm going to share this evening. But I've experienced so much more since then. So, with your patience, I'll tack on an epilogue to fill in a bit more. So, chug some coffee and let's get started. So, my first big task is to share the screen. And why did I have oh, here we go. Good. Okay. Does that look good to you, Susan?
Looks looks good to me. I had to unmute myself.
Oh, actually, I've got one thing I want to do. Sorry. And oh, shoot. I need to get back into Zoom here. I wanted I wanted to turn off my video, mute my audio, stop video. Okay. And let me give you a full screen again. If I keep doing this more, maybe I'll get good at it. Okay. Okay. So you know what I'm going to talk about, rivers of France. Well, first of all, you may notice me toggling back and forth between saying I and we. This is not a grammatical error. That's because on that first excursion, 1987, a friend named Sally was sharing the adventure. Most subsequent trips have been solo. Of course, the first challenge was how to get over there. We considered all the options. But as you may guess, we settled on flying on one of those airplane machines with my boat as baggage. As for Sally, we borrowed a kayak from her friend in France. Now, once we arrived, we rented a car. Then the question is where to go and how to get around. Well, all you really need is a copy of the wonderful German Canoe Federation guidebook for the former. German, you ask? Yeah, they are the big travelers, and they keep good notes and spread the word. And then you ask, does Ed know German? No, but the average guidebook author is borderline literate, and if you know just a few crucial words, maybe about 100, you can get by. Now, as for navigating the roads, the Michelin Road Atlas is great. Remember, in 1987, there were no GPSs, okay? Keep your perspective. Well, once armed with that, you can take to the roads. Just follow the signs. For example, when you see the blue signs, that means they're for the autoroute, which is French for freeway, which are anything but free. The tolls would give any American sticker shock. So if you're cheap and a paddler, sorry, I guess that's redundant, you will you'll want to follow the white signs. Yeah, it's slower, but you'll truly get to see the country. Signs in France can, however, at least by the standards of the time, be provocative. So be forewarned that you should keep your eyes on the road at all times because sometimes there's just little margin of error. One other hazard I should mention to you for motorists is parking. It can be challenging in the big cities, and they are serious about enforcement. Well, let's orient you. At about 211,000 square miles, France is just a bit smaller than Texas, so there's lots to cover. Now, back in those days, I was pretty focused on its whitewater prospects, so I focused on the mountainous south, where there are four major uplands: the Jura, the Alps, the Pyrenees, and the Massif Central. Tonight, I will take you to all of them. So let's start with the Jura, which is not really mountains, but a cold, wet plateau. When I was there, spring was just beginning to break out. Trees up top were bare, and most of the common flowers were just daffodils. There are not that many sizable rivers there. So I decided I'll tell you about the River Lou. Now, those of you who have paddled with me know that I like to be thorough, running a river from top to bottom, if at all possible. So let's go straight to the start. Just look for the cute little chapel on a hilltop, and then start hiking down a well-trod trail through flowery woods, which will get you to a big spring. And the French word for that is source. It would have been nice to put in right there, but shortly downstream there is a dam, and then another dam, then shunting the entire flow through a pipe to a power plant downstream, thereby cheating me out of an exciting run through a spectacular gorge. Bummer. So I went down to the first possible put-in, a little burg called Moutier, and there, the stream supplemented by more springs, I found a very navigable path. Leaving town, it soon heads off into the forest, and it's an unusual forest at that, as the trunks and branches are coated with a thick pelt of moss. Now, my theory is that the constant temperature spring water fosters fogs in both the depth of summer and depth of winter, thus nurturing the growth of moss. But what do I know? So what follows is a string of old industrial towns, all centered around long closed mills, each with a dam. I believe I encountered 16 dams in 24 miles. Most were portages or liftovers, but one portage, oh my gosh, I'm still traumatized by it. It was particularly grueling, sending me up this lane and down that alley and up, up, up behind the town. A hot day. It got so bad at the summit of an exhausting climb, I stumbled upon the shrine in the woods. Now, I am not a religious man, but at that moment I slammed my canoe to the ground, dropped to my knees, and began sobbing and praying to the woman for mercy. She was not impressed, and their trail wandered on. Well, helping the situation sometime was that the dams were coated with a thick layer of moss, allowing me to slide over without even a scratch in my tender little boat. Of course, these dams were once functional, there to direct water to turn paddle wheels to drive machinery. I found that where the wheels were really crumbling, I could sometimes run the mill races. Man, you'd think you've seen some strainers in your day. Well, you see a lot of towns from the water. I always appreciated their clock towers, as I was always rushing to get down the river before dark. Of course, the old architecture is charming, especially when they include things like castles. It's amazing that these have withstood all the floods and wars through the ages. In contrast with these towns, there is a particularly wild section, lined by limestone cliffs with strange zigzag ledges in the stream. Now, I want to say a little bit more about dams, though. There are just thousands of them across France, many being relics of the day when water-powered mills, but many are still functional today, often devoted to the generation of electricity. As if the portage around the dams were not bad enough, sometimes the plumbing schemes were elaborate, where most of the water is diverted into a canal or pipe leading to our power plant many miles downstream. The French national power company, Rivieres de France, is the master of this, sometimes collecting water on the mountaintops to generate power thousands of feet below. Anyway, while they may generate a lot of energy, The unprepared paddler, unexpectedly confronted with a portage or drag down several miles of dewatered streambed, will be thoroughly out of energy. One compelling reason to use that good guidebook before embarking. Well, let's head on over to the Massif Central, and in doing so, we have to cross the Rhone River, maybe as I did at the big city of Lyon. Lyon is located at the confluence of the Rhone and the Saône rivers, and when I saw the latter, I just had to paddle it. Nature's grand, but I do like urban paddling. So it can be like canyon paddling, only in place of cliffs with soaring bald eagles, you see retaining walls and towering facades of buildings with pigeons. Lots of windows that they do up in a fancy way in old Europe. Note that they're functional too, as are all those pretty shutters. Of course, you'll see your fill of churches. The larger the town, the larger the churches. As for the riverside, walls replace banks, and like here in the US, these can be the media for many a lovelorn graffiti artist. You'll also see hundreds of iron rings in those walls, which are not there for decoration. They're for mooring boats. See, now, most large and many small rivers in France have been improved for navigation. Unlike in the US, where river traffic is usually in the form of a towboat pushing a rectangular barge, the typical commercial boat in France more resembles a scaled-up version of the barge design we might have seen on our own C&O Canal. And they are apparently lived upon too, in style. All right, let's get out of the city into the glory of rural France. I just can't emphasize how flowery France is in springtime. Lots of yellow from dandelions or buttercups in the pastures, or even more striking, monocultures of rapeseed, which yields seeds from which is extracted cooking oil, known by a more marketable name, canola. And then, especially in the south, there are fields of poppies. Oh, so beautiful. And lots more that I don't know the name of. Well, here's a fact. You just can't throw a stone in France without hitting a castle or a chateau. More about this later, but let me say they are part of the French culture and consciousness and become so at an early age. Well, back to the rivers. Let's start with the river known for its castles, France's longest river, the Loire, which starts up on the Massif. I did a nice section of it near Le Puy. Le Puy is a distinctive city. Located in a formerly volcanic section of the plateau, it's noted for its crowned pinnacles and distinctive lentils. So wander around. The inhabitants are friendly. Maybe not so the dogs. Now, on the eastern side of the Massif is a region called the Cevennes, a distinctive region defined by its limestone foundations. This breeds stunning rivers, and none more so than the Ardèche. For 18 miles, the river snakes through a largely wild gorge. Then in summer, oops, then in summer, you'll share with thousands of bozos and rental canoes and kayaks. Indeed, as I beheld the river from above and saw those little white dots against the dark water, I thought of a term coined by the late whitewater canoeist and satirist William Neely. That term was river maggots. I'm such a snob, sorry. Fortunately, in the spring, things are much more subdued. There's a unique start as the river passes through a huge natural bridge called the Pont d'Arc. Now, by 1987, plastic had already found its grip on Europe, where the liveries embraced the unsinkable metal heavy barges. So we were so pleased to befriend a German couple in a real canoe. So let's head on down the river with them and now look up at that same wonderful scenery. We managed soon enough to shake the crowds and have a fairly solitary experience. The river is pretty gentle, only occasionally treating us to some fun white water. Of course, even here you cannot escape the fishermen. But maybe you can. You see, we encountered some gentlemen casting into the weeds and the lily pads, not the open water. How strange. So on closer inspection, we discovered he was apparently not a fisherman, but a frogger man. Now, if I understood her right, one just casts the fly out amongst the reeds and the lily pads, and old Kermit irresistibly takes the bait. Of course, you know what's next. Those French people, they just love their frog's legs, devour them like popcorn. You may chuckle, but there's a dark side to this. Well, I learned this one day as I broke through the reeds to lunch, and I beheld a scene, folks, right out of the bowels of hell. And now I understood the true impact of this barbaric custom. And the frogs, they protest. Listen, all right, all right. I don't want this show to be a downer. So let's move on. Let's turn to something more cheerful. Yes. Now, another recommended descent, just an hour's drive to the south of the Ardèche, would be in the nearby Gardon. Like us, you'll probably put in under less than optimal flow conditions at a 16th century span called the Pont Saint Nicolas. It's hard to get out. But fear not, shortly downstream, this being limestone country, some voluminous springs goose the flow to a happy volume, easing your crew through a beautiful gorge, and then a triumphant finish under the ancient spans of a Roman aqueduct, the Pont du Gard. If only the American Legion Bridge would last that long. Now, folks, this is about balanced journalism, not tourist propaganda. The French Tourist Board did not hire me to do this show, I assure you. So I have to reveal that in the 1980s, rivers could be pretty trashy. And no wonder when they put open, often burning dumps on the hillsides, right by the rivers, with wind and gravity spreading the wealth. But there were signs of hope even back then, as the French were already more tuned into recycling than we were, and you would find recycling pods in every town dutifully taken advantage of. And I'm pleased to report that I see far, far cleaner rivers in my more recent visits. One final comment is that no matter how much we stress the ecosystem, it strives to adjust. For example, when shellfish take advantage of those bottles as reefs. Well, really, if you have the time and favorable water levels, do linger in this area, this event. Don't waste a minute. Start early in the morning before the mist is even cleared. You'll want to float down the river Seza with its imposing rock formations, caves, and springs. And always take a second look. You may discover that that beautiful natural cliff has a castle on its crest, and that gushing spring irrigates a fig tree, food by the river. And even here, you just can't avoid those old mills. But do you really want to? Their beauty inspires many an artist, maybe the next Monet. And should you at any time forget where you are, maybe walking through a vineyard to lunch will remind you you're not in Kansas anymore. And if things are indeed up, you must descend the Ardèche tributary they call the Chezazac. It too flaunts its limestone in so many shapes and forms. Well, all this paddling builds up an appetite. I'm sure you understand. And this is the country to address that. Good food starts, of course, with good fresh ingredients, and these will be beautifully presented at every little market and marketplace. Of course, bread is the staff of life in France, most commonly consumed in the form of the baguette. Don't go home without one or more. And that's how I started my day, slowly devouring the baguette, chased by a tasty treat. Well, part of the joy in travel is tasting the cuisine of the land. I always try to eat dinner in restaurants, and that takes some adjustment in a place like France, like coexisting with dogs. Honestly, they're better behaved than many children in American restaurants. And don't be in a hurry. It's nothing to linger over dinner for 2 or more hours, and the restaurants never try to hurry you out. Now, I was indoctrinated to fear the quality of drinking water in Europe. Just not true. It seemed that every little village had a town fountain of potable water. The output tasted fine to me, and apparently so to the locals. Indeed, the bottling of spring water, think Perrier or Evian, is big business. Now let's jump to the north slope of the Massif now, where you'll find a lovely trout stream called the Allegheny. It kind of reminded me of our South Branch Potomac headwaters, but that's where the similarity ends. A lot of the greenery on the stream banks here are stinging nettles. They're native to Europe, but they can grow chin high and make portage into a nightmare. And yes, while this reminded me of some Potomac headwaters, the cultural features are so much prettier and more harmonious. And of course, the flowers just keep coming. Good time to be paddling. There are just a few villages along this creek, sometimes crumbling and forgotten, always a church. Now, jumping over to the south side of the Massif is another stream not to miss, the Tarn. It too is in limestone country with flow generously supplemented by springs, some as big as creeks. There's one tough reach called the Pas Souci, but otherwise it's a simple passage through nature and some charming little towns like Saint-Remy that you'll want to take some time to explore. And people live beyond the towns too, working their way into the landscape as best they can, with nature always ready to reclaim. But don't be fooled by this tranquility. This is a normal river that with enough rain can turn into a monster. Just gasp at the high water mark on a house already high above the river. Flow is everything. Snails! Oh, snails! You just can't go far in France without encountering gastropods. Yes, snails and slugs. They come in many colors and sizes. They are everywhere. They would probably inundate the nation if the French did not fight back by eating them. So if you go to France, do your duty to defend the nation. And please order escargot when you go out to dine. So if you get a wet year, there are so many brooks to paddle on the Massif, like the VR, which not only provided a lively run, but a beautiful wildflower tour. Hillsides covered with a prickly evergreen yellow flowers called gorse, not something you want to have to wade through. But do stop and sniff the blooms, and if they're mint, taste them. This is indeed an isolated run, but not so much that the dedicated angler can't find a way in. But I emphasize it is always a good ride, and there's always another mill dam and always another farm. And that's part of its quality. Now, on my 1988 trip, I caught some good high water, particularly on a stream called the Aveyron. On that day, I came across a pair of enthusiastic dudes in a Wildwater C2, seemingly afraid of nothing, even though the bowman had a prosthetic arm. They were running some amazingly big dams at high water, even getting me to do so. But one relatively small one was the most serious. They thought they could ace it. Well, the dam had other ideas, and as they wiped out, and I watched as they churned and churned in the keeper, and I thought for sure I would witness a double drowning. But this was a diagonal dam, and as they again and again got sucked under, popped up, and so on, the path was really a slow spiral to the downstream end, and after what seemed like an eternity, they washed to where I stood and I could pull them out. At that point, they'd had enough, and I could resume my solo journey. On a lighter note, the midpoint of this run is marked by a big loop, perched on which is an ancient village called Nyack. Set aside time to explore it. It's magical. Now, on that 1987 trip, we mostly camped in an unauthorized way. In French, it's called camping sauvage, which literally means wild camping. And it's officially illegal. We were pretty naive back then and just thought it was okay anywhere. And you know what? It worked out just fine. Oh, sometimes livestock might come sniffing around. We always pulled in after dark, set up unnoticed, but in the morning, a farmer might come around and check us out. But they were always friendly, and we'd pull out the French English dictionary and make small talk. One night we camped, and what we learned was a commune. And come morning, a gentleman speaking English with an Irish accent stuck his head in our tent and says, "When you two get up, won't you join us for a bit of breakfast?" Turns out the place was a refuge for homeless and wanderers where they could stay for a time, work for their board, and maybe get their lives back in order. Oh, and sometimes we found ourselves camping with other paddlers, probably Germans, who seemed to be pros at this wild camping lifestyle. Did you know France had water trails back then, way all those years ago, before we did, as on the River Sella? I did a 45-mile stretch one day on my 1988 trip. The charm of this river is that it's a linear living museum with a chain of perfectly preserved medieval villages that you just have to stop and explore. Of course, part of the beauty are all the religious edifices. Yes, the cathedrals are great, but I find the little country churches are often unlocked and worth poking about, and everywhere there are the stray crosses on the hilltops and shrines elsewhere. Perhaps this is a good moment to mention the French treatment of the dead. The cemeteries over there are villages in themselves, and they are so well tended, real shrines to those that they loved. Speaking of those lost, the world wars took a terrible toll, and everywhere you see memorials in the tiniest of villages with shockingly long lists. But back to the Sella, it seems a place frozen in time, a perfect getaway both for me and those ubiquitous anglers. Yes, they are everywhere looking for that big catch. So much so that there can be user conflicts. So you'll come upon some rivers, and particularly trout or salmon streams, where the agreement is that the anglers get the early and late hours and paddlers the midday. I confess I was a frequent scofflaw. Well, moving on, up into the heart of the Massif is a classic river and valley, the Dordogne. It's a fairly big river, and much of the Massif headwaters have been drowned by big hydroelectric projects, but those reservoirs sustain reliable flows on the remaining 100 or so miles of free-flowing river. It's a paddler's favorite, a river repeatedly lined by old towns and older castles, pastures full of happy livestock, and locals from central casting. This is a region known for its strawberries, and you just cannot resist buying some. Also, this is the foie gras capital of France, chopped goose liver in plain English. Good for the palate, bad for the goose. When driving the valley, you'll find bridges that are much less stressful than the ones you typically drive. So go boat there, but save lots of time to explore what's in the river, up on the banks and the bluffs, wander its ancient towns and its abbeys, observe all the fine details. Enjoy. Well, so it was just the two of us in 1987, and again, just me later. Always one car. So, how do you shuttle, you ask? Well, they have more mass transit options over there, so I took the bus in Lyon. As you know, railroads often follow rivers and mountains, and over there they have ample passenger service on many lines, and that mode can be useful, fun, and cheap. But more often than not, I just put out the old thumb, and that generally worked just fine. If you're daring, you might even hitch a ride on a motorbike. It'll do, but be choosy about which one you do. It can be quite exciting. When I travel alone, I like to drop my boat off first and then shuttle. I want it secure, so I leave the boat at someone's house or business. Of course, I have to ask permission first. Not being fluent in French, I had a friend prepare a monologue to hand to the prospective guardian. Now, a challenge in France is that many houses are surrounded by walls and you can't get to the door. So you ring the bell at the gate, and some person sticks their head out of the window and asks, "What do you want?" So I was forced to read the monologue. Pretty pathetic, but it worked. There is one danger, though. What if you leave your boat inside the wall and they go away before you return from shuttle? That happened to me one day, but the nice truck driver who picked me up hitchhiking proceeded to go around the town looking for someone to let me in, and when he failed, he just scaled the wall and tossed my boat and gear over to me. What a saint. Well, let's move on to the Pyrenees. When you see them, you really have to question Hannibal's judgment in taking elephants over them. There are nice streams throughout. Over at the west end, near the Atlantic, the mountains are relatively gentle. This is Basque country with its own unusual language and distinctive architecture of white houses with tile roofs. Oh, somebody needs to mute. It would be so nice to paddle amongst the snow-capped peaks, but mostly streams become runnable, at least for us, farther down the slopes. They could be fun runs, but often they were particularly plagued with dams, some of perplexing design, some being negotiable. But when not, you may be in for convoluted portages through the villages, attracting a few stares. Of course, I always wanted to paddle, but in such beautiful mountains, it pays to take some time to hike, enjoying both the details, the, the flora, the fauna, getting up to that beautiful snow in summertime, hard to believe, and just getting the big picture. But back to paddling. We found a lovely run on a river called the Gava de Aspa. A number of the rivers around here are called Gava, and don't know exactly what it means, but I suspect it's just a local variant of creek or river. It had a much more favorable fund to portage ratio. So did the river Arak. Now, one particularly good paddling stream is the Salat. There are easy sections and harder. We met a pair of native paddlers there, one of which had run the harder section. He said it kicked his butt and he'll never go back, but I was keenly interested and talked him into just going up and take another look. You're probably better now. It won't look that hard. So we headed on up the river, and there we observed a bunch of turkeys tubing the reach. So not to be outdone, we swallowed our fears, went on down to where we thought it would be navigable, and launched by a cemetery, hopefully not to where this river would ultimately send us. It indeed rocked, but we had a great time and finished unscathed. Now, a bit farther east is the River Oda. Its prime spots are the Gorge St. George and the Gorge Peerless. The former is not all that hard, and I encountered a friendly group of young paddlers from the lowland city of Tunin, which is over near Bordeaux. I invited myself to tag along with them. Now, I have to note that when a comparatively old fellow shows up alone in an old school C1, such groups tend to have their doubts about whether they should let him join. But back in those days, I was at the top of my game, and after catching some crisp eddies, surfing with some waves, and maybe popping an ender or two, I could always win them over. On this day, I may have overdone it. The second gorge, Peerless, is intense and steep, squeezed between a road and a cliff with a wicked course through big and offset holes. They were planning to finish above this gorge, but after my great performance, they insisted that I just had to check this out. I wisely declined, but they insisted and offered to lead. So I was stuck. When we got there, half the crew got out, it being way over their head, and set up safety. Then the fellow I was following disappeared over the first horizon line, only to quickly reappear, airborne in a back ender, and then swimming. So I became the prode. Read and run only through a watery maze of juicy offset holes that followed. All I can say is that I survived. It wasn't pretty. Now, if you spend some time in the Pyrenees, you may be curious about Andorra, one of Europe's micro countries. I was curious, and I imagined I would find some idyllic Heidi land, a European Shangri-La. So you can imagine my shock when I found this festering wound of commercial excess. It was pretty disgusting. You see, many years ago, the powers to be decided that they'd had enough of poverty and isolation wrought by an economy of sheep herding, so they established the place as a duty-free port, and the rest is history. Of course, I wanted to paddle there on its one river, the Rio Valera del Nord, but not through town. The guidebook rated the river class 3, 4, 5, and 6 in that order, so I retreated to the upland country to tackle the class 3 section. A flush of only 1.5 miles convinced me this may not end well, and I caught a desperation eddy above a major drop and scaled a small cliff just to escape. Whew. So, back to France. I just love driving between the rivers. On the back roads, there is a town every few miles. They all look alike. These aren't the super charming preserved ancient villages. This is just everyday rural France. But there's somebody's home sweet home, a place they take pride in, a place they do their best to keep fresh. This is not the place the international tourists go, just me spying on them. Now, I do sometimes visit places of renown, like Avignon with its Pope's Palace, but even there I find myself focused on more mundane things like the upcoming election. Just think how much less money would be needed to run for office if instead of pricey attack ads on TV, you just plaster a big wall with repetitive posters. That seemed to be the strategy over there. But what do I know? Well, let's hop on east to the Riviera, where I decided on my solo trip to do some sea canoeing. Just off the Mediterranean coast near the naval port of Toulon is a chain of islands protected as a national park. These are the Air Islands, and the nearest one, Porquerolles, is only 2.5 miles offshore. Most tourists take the tourist ferry, but the sea was calm and I decided to paddle over. My plan was to go out for a day and camp overnight. The paddle went without a hitch, and I pulled into this cute little harbor, found a home to stash my boat at, and went off exploring. Though this is a national park, it's not all wild. There's some farming done there, grains, I believe, but there are also beautiful beaches, and these are on lonely, stunning coast. But that's the leeward side. On the windward side, it's, well, windy, and notably more rocky too, and jagged. It might have made my paddle more challenging if that's where I had to live. Now, the interior of the island is jungle-like, and hidden in its grip are ruins from a not-so-sleepy past. Well, after a full day of hiking and beachcombing, I returned to the little port village, enjoyed a delicious restaurant feast, and headed down the coast to find a secluded camp spot. It had to be secluded as camping was illegal in the national park. I found a perfect landing spot and laid out my sleeping bag on rock shelves above the beach to enjoy a quiet night under the stars. Unfortunately, that rock was a seagull colony, and they raised quite a stink, both figuratively and literally, and protested my uninvited presence. But they got over it soon enough. So I lay down to a peaceful night, trying not to think about the Hitchcock movie. When I awoke, the world was at peace, and I just sat in my sleeping bag, munching on a cold pain du chocolat. All was well with the world. And then I heard the putt-putt of a motor and thought, uh-oh, the fuzz. So I packed up and got in my boat, paddled out, and discovered false alarm. It was just a pair of watermen who I checked out. You may wonder, what were they catching? Well, answer, octopus. They even offered to give me one. I politely declined. Well, this island adventure was my own in 1988, as I just said. But in 1987, two of us visited the Riviera, and it was particularly there that my companion decided we should do a bit more than just boating on this trip. Really? I said. Oh, gosh. It's really embarrassing. Folks, you probably already heard the rumors. It's true. That's the only way I can explain being sighted on one of those beaches near Saint-Tropez, or hanging out in these strange places called art galleries. Well, not exactly my thing, but I admit I did like Marc Chagall. But this is not interesting, so let's head on up into the Alps. Now, the Alps comprise a bunch of mountains, the High Alps, the Prealps, and the Maritime Alps. For example, The pre-Alps, we did a gentle stream, gentle beauty called the Drôme, and a more sprightly tributary of it called the Roanne. Both I recommend. Now, over in the Maritime Alps are some pretty committing runs, such as the Gorge of the Vesubie, which we agreed probably would not be wise to try. So we decided to do it. Now, half the challenge is just getting into the river. Of course, the problem is that in a place like this, you can't always stop, scout, or portage. Like I say, committing. But that was just a warm up. The Vesubie flows into the Var, which has a stunning gorge called the Gorge de Dalaoui. It's over 1,000 foot deep crack in the earth, so much so that I don't believe direct sunlight ever reaches the bottom. It drops about 90 feet a mile for about 4 miles, and as the guidebook says, the only way out is by the water. Again, committing. Well, let's go on up into the high Alps now, where you might enjoy the Ubai. It's a substantial whitewater river, but we found a relaxing Class 2 stretch and made sure not to miss the takeout as the river then plunges through a Class 5 gorge down to its meeting with the Durance. Now, the Durance may be the most popular river in the high Alps, with a reliable high volume, and where it narrows down, big water. There's even a commercial rafting industry there. A bit to the north, for something smaller, I recommend the Class 3 section of the Drac. It's really not that hard, but that allows you to soak in the wonderful scenery. And now for the Verdon. First, as a warm-up, there's the Upper Verdon. It's a mild torrent coming down from the Italian border. It's a favorite of the Germans. I was there during a German holiday weekend, and there are droves of them in pods of 6, 8, 10, evenly spaced. Sometimes it seemed even paddling in sync. Sheesh, think about stereotypes. And a new generation will follow. But the Verdon known to most of the paddling world is downstream. This is the Gorge du Verdon, or the Grand Canyon of the Verdon, where for 16 miles it carves a slot through the limestone massif. It's dam controlled, which means it's usually dewatered, but it was flowing when I was there, and I had two locals to show me down it. Now, it starts off peacefully enough, which is good because it gives you time to stare up, 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 or take a look down, down, down in its crystal clear water. But then it gets serious, with only the most marginal of portage options. Now, one peculiarity of this run is the underground paddling. It takes you through caves, really. And even when not, the canyon gets so narrow and overhung you feel underground. But the real crux is a 100-yard stretch where rock falls have totally filled the bottom of the gorge. It might be the making of the worst portage ever, but you know what? You paddle under it in the pitch black. And then when you reach the end, it siphons out and you might be trapped, except there's a slot up through the boulders, just big enough to squeeze a boat through. And then you boulder launch to resume the run. And then there's one spot where one huge boulder plugged the whole river, but it had a marginal squeeze through. Now, vertical clearance is not the only challenge. Horizontal, too. While we were running this river at about maybe 350 CFS, it was so compressed that it exhibited big river turbulence that really pushed you around, which was troublesome as you aim for the maze of narrow slots. One could get in trouble here. And there were some things you just had to portage, and these portages were sometimes guarded by enormous toads that seemed to be indigenous to the Mediterranean area. But in spite of all the dangers and challenges, this is one of the most wonderful places I have ever been on a river. Indeed, after the Verdun, I could have easily just retired on the experience, converted my canoe to a flower pot. But no, as you know, I obviously have kept on looking for more and better, and I will continue to do so. But that's what I had to report back to canoe cruisers 35 years ago. Please let me now add a few comments and observation gleaned in my subsequent experience, okay? Well, one is that there's much more to France than those southern highlands, all worth exploring, on land and by river. The land to the north and the west is much more gentle, but it has its charms too. You even find whitewater there sometimes. But this might be an opportunity to explore more of the seashore. The heavily developed Riviera is not representative. Look on the map and you see amazingly straight coast along the Bay of Biscay. That coast is a home of miles and miles of huge, lonely sand dunes. It is a wild seashore, a mountain range of sand that you can explore from top to bottom if you have the energy. And if you don't think that nature's good enough job with the sand, go try your own hand. If you go north, especially the Brittany, the country confronts the angry Atlantic with a jagged, rocky coast. Might not be the best place to boat, but you can enjoy it on land thanks to a wonderful system of footpaths. I note that the French are apparently enthusiastic hikers and maintain an astounding system of trails in every corner of the country. Now, castles. I mentioned the abundance of castles and palaces in France. I am not exaggerating, they are everywhere. What's nice is that so many are along the rivers that you may paddle. My favorite is on the River Cher, and that is the Chateau de Chenonceau, which is essentially the most elaborate covered bridge you'll ever see. And amazing to me, as an American, it's legal to paddle underneath it. No security zone. You're expected to behave yourself. That's all you have to do. Language. Oh, the challenge of language. First of all, let me dispel the American myth that all the French speak English, rather, they just don't reveal it. Well, many do speak English, but more don't, especially when you get off the international tourist track, as I do. So I try to learn a few basics. They appreciate it, and they'll help you if you can. I try clumsily. My favorite gaffe is when I try to say alone. Remember that monologue, that put-in monologue? I'm told mispronounce these words, and instead of saying I'm alone, you're saying I'm drunk. That's not good. And then there's a frequent question I get by the people watching my boat. How long will you be gone on shuttle? Well, when I try to say 3 days or 3 hours, it always sounds the same as 3 days. If you know any French, I hope you'll understand. Very confusing. Now, here's another example. How do you pronounce the name of this river? Well, since this isn't a live audience, I'm gonna answer the question for you. It's La Real. Who would guess? But it's always amusing how geographic names, when read, don't translate well into English. I present just a few examples, and they would include probably the most photographed selfie sign for American tourists in the country. And would you really want to eat at this restaurant? Now, you probably think, Ed, you're such a dummy, but the challenge goes both ways. One example. One day I was paddling the Chesezac with a young couple. They're a Swiss couple from the French corner of Switzerland, so they were francophones. And they needed to pull off the river part way down. You see, they were newly parents, and they had to meet up with their nanny so the mother could go nurse the infant. The husband tried to explain that it was time to feed the baby, but what came off his lips was, quote, "We must stop now and eat the baby." Whew, that was shocking. Okay, on to another subject. Dams. I mentioned dams before. You might wonder, with all the dams, why would anybody want to mess with French rivers? Well, fortunately, paddling is really big in France, and there have been efforts to remove some dams, and on the thousands that remain, eliminate the pain of portaging many of them with dedicated chutes called glissières. When so when you're slogged through the dead water and a horizon line appears ahead, look around and hopefully you see a little green sign and head for that green sign. And hope, and there you'll find some little lips. Ignore your fear of heights and just go for it and have some fun. It's a hoot. And I mean, I've done 25-foot dams. It's just amazing. But they're engineered, they're idiot proof. Sometimes they don't have glissier, but they ease the pain of portaging with slides. Next subject, World War I and II. The two world wars were pretty much fought in the North, but you'd hardly know it as you behold the serene landscape. But there are reminders, such as the military cemeteries. There are many of them, and they are big. If you visit the seashore anywhere, you will inevitably come across old shore defense bunkers. After all, the Germans really didn't know where D-Day was going to take place. And of course, a visit to the D-Day beaches is rewarding. And I should mention that there's still a collective memory of and gratitude for America's rescue in World War II. And sometimes from not just from old timers. I was amazed. Well, on to the subject of food, world class and affordable. As I said, I ate in restaurants and I like to choose from the fixed price meals. Just a quick sampling, meant to please both the eye and the palate. And they always didn't disappoint. My favorite dessert is profiteroles, which is a puff pastry filled with ice cream and covered with chocolate sauce. I would order it any time it was on the menu. And let us not forget the humble baguette. Have it every day. And if you're lucky, get an early start, maybe they'll still be warm when you go to the bakery, the boulangerie. Again, I emphasize the produce there is awesome, and their presentation's important too. And if you want to taste some new seafood, here's your chance. Much better selection than in Giant or Safeway. And last but not least, hopefully you make some friends while you're there, and maybe they'll invite you home to dinner where they go out to their garden and get the fixings and prepare you something that's tasty and beautiful. I got more to say about dogs. Yeah, I mentioned the nasty dogs and the cute dogs in the restaurants. But what's really worth reporting is that for the ages, cities and towns were minefields of dog poop. And that was really bad, especially for a tourist like me wandering around town, gawking at the scenery, not looking where he's going. It could get pretty messy. But that began changing maybe 10 or 12 years ago, certainly with the help of idealistic young crusaders. And the problem today is much less reduced, just like here in America. Just goes to show you that the tradition-bound French can change. Well, last but not least, there are the people. Americans have an attitude about the French. This is so unfair. While I contend that people are the same everywhere, I will say that on my visits to France, kind and friendly people were the rule, not the exception. Let me introduce you to a few. Of course, there are the people of the puddings who came to the door, who graciously honored my request to guard my beloved canoe, sometimes putting it right by their own prized possessions, sometimes offering to lock it up in the barn. And it was not unusual for me to return from a shuttle to find a care package thoughtfully placed in the boat, to ease my the pain of my journey, or at a minimum, greeting me with a cup of coffee. Let me tell you about the nice lady at the put-in who, upon realizing that I was going to hitchhike the shuttle, rushed inside and printed me out a hitchhike sign. Then there was a family in a little village on the rim of the gorge of the River Anne. Yeah, rim of the gorge. That was the closest place I could find where I felt comfortable leaving my boat. I knew not the way of the river down into that gorge, and as I inquired with the adults, the cute little red-haired girl in the middle ran inside, and a few minutes later reappeared with a piece of paper half the size of her body, and with crayons and magic markers, she created a map for me to find my way to the river. Then I think back to the nice man at the put-in who cleared a path to the river for me with his weed whacker so I wouldn't have to wade through his nasty stinging nettles. And I can't forget all the nice people I would meet in transit, like the power plant operators who came out and insisted on portaging my boat for me. Then there were the rides, sometimes from the person at the put-in following me down, but more often just those who stopped when I put up my thumb. Now, I don't still can't figure out why hitchhiking is any easier in France than the United States. Probably the same. But I did notice way more women of all ages and parents with young kids, from babies to teenagers, were not afraid to stop. Let me tell you about one of my favorite hitchhike memories. That was on May Day morning in Alsace, where I was on a deserted road. Things are still pretty quiet, and a young woman with a baby in the back seat stopped. She'd just come from the supermarket and had some perishables. She said she would be glad to drive me specially up to my put-in beyond her house, but asked if I mind stopping first at home so she'd get stuff in the refrigerator. When we got there, she runs in with the groceries, leaving me in the car with the baby, with the keys in the ignition. Such trust. I, I just don't expect this in life. When we arrived at the put-in, she got out and started chatting, obviously about me, with the couples guarding my boat. Now, a May Day tradition in France is hanging out a bouquet of lilies of the valleys for good luck. I noticed many a vendor of those things on street corners. As I launched, they did so for me. I placed it underneath my spare paddle holder, and I got down the river without a scratch. So it must have worked. And right now, as I'm talking to you, I'm gazing up at the wall in my office at a dried bouquet of those lilies, a treasured keepsake I'll never part with. Well, there is so much more I could tell you, but you've got to get a good night's sleep. So I thank you for being such a kind audience, and I'm ready now to take any questions and to encourage you. This is not an extraordinary exotic adventure. Anybody who can do that. And if you ever need any guidance on it, you know where to find me. Don't be shy. I like to help people find their way to a river. So I'm going to try to get out a share screen and appear again.
Very good, Ed. Very enjoyable.
Oh, great. Could you hear the frogs?
Nope, not a peep.
Oh, shoot. Sorry about that. We thought we came up with a solution. Guess it didn't work.
I know it didn't. Mm.
Well, I can I can look at chat and see if there are any questions. Um, somebody said I was one of those bozos in the Ardèche. I'll still speak to you. Was the
Oh,
nudist
I feel so much better, Ed, that you'll still talk to me.
Let's see, was the nudist colony going on the river left as you went through the arch? Through the arch. The nudist colonies move around, but I saw plenty of them. Yeah, it's all part of the scenery. And
Yeah.
I assure you, once you've seen this, you realize it's not quite what you were imagining. Picture your grandpa undressed. So
Oh no, I always imagined horrors.
yeah, yeah. Well, all of us have our fantasies. Did
And
a
the Ardèche was completely full of Germans, like you said.
Yeah. Well, luckily we missed the busy season. So did a whitewater training run through the gorge. Oh, I did a whitewater training gorge to the gorge during the 1980 Corsica tour. Let's see. So this is bringing back memories for some people. Thank you for the thank yous, but no questions. Come on. Surely I forgot to tell you something. I could have told you so much more. Wait, here's something about hitchhiking. When was your most recent trip? It was hitchhiking still okay at that point. Most recent trip was 2019.
Hmm.
Then COVID shut me down. And then also my go-to airline, Lufthansa, stopped carrying boats as big as mine. And I had to come up with a plan B, which I now have. It's called a pack raft. So I'm ready and raring to go back. Let's see. Thanks so much. What's that?
Just tap that screen. That's what
I did.
frogs play.
I did.
Okay, go
It,
back.
it did it. You can't hear anything?
Nope. Show it.
Are you muted?
That's really weird. We took an auxiliary well, tablet and just played up the sound there, and I don't know why that wouldn't come through. Let's see, here's a question. Um, let's see. Thanks. I was so excited to be back in France after 25 years, even though no paddling planned. We'll be enjoying the Brittany, Normandy seashore, though. Hopefully, you'll be on those trails. Did you ever bring your canoe on a train for a shuttle? Not in France. I did that in Switzerland one time on the headwaters of the Rhine. But I really didn't need my system worked okay, even though that would have been cool. And I thank
Ed,
you.
this is Jen.
Yes.
What's your next pack off trip?
After the West Virginia thing, I'm going out to Wisconsin. Nothing exotic for a while. Well, we're not that crowded if you want to just voice in. What about airlines? Can you, what about, you can recommend one? Well, traditionally, I have I've used different airlines over the years as they've changed. Most recently, probably the last 10 years of travel have been um, Lufthansa. They're probably still a good deal. They have a cutoff of 325 centimeters for oversized baggage, but that would accommodate like an RPM and probably a lot of whitewater boats now. And so uh, I don't know how much it's going to cost right now, but when I last traveled, it cost me about $500 going and coming for excess baggage fee. Well worth it to have your own boat that you fit. So. So next time I fly, I'll probably still fly with Lufthansa. It also works into my car plans. And I see a question. I knew that this would raise eyebrows from Michael and Diana. Where in Wisconsin? Headed up to the Flambeau. And are open canoes available for rent? That is a very good question. Uh, for those of you who don't want to fly with boats, France is a great place for the boatless person. Obviously, okay, you know you're not going to be able to go everywhere I went, but they're really big on liveries. And I went over there with Carol back in 2002, I think it was, and we paddled the Ardèche and the Tarn and the Gardon and gosh, I'm forgetting what, probably at least 8 or 10 rivers I know of, and a bunch of them banded together and had sort of like a single website, and you could get a discount if you went on with one to the next. And one of the things back then, now this is 20 years ago, but they have those big clunky boats. But we found that usually they had like an old town tripper or something like that stowed away somewhere, and we could get them to lend that to us, and something we're familiar with and felt good on. But definitely, you can at least do some of the really beautiful rivers there, and of course you'll have a shuttle too. Let's see. And here's something. My only paddling was a family trip in the Sorgue on a rented tandem. It was fun, included a ramp descending a small dam. Yes, the Sorgue is not doesn't have spectacular scenery, but it has beautiful clear water that comes right out of the ground at the put in, and it's well worth it. It's over near Avignon. And even though we have GPSs now, that Michelin guide is really great. It's it definitely gives you a good overlook or overview. So let's see. Someone asked me, did I rent from Kayak Vert? I'm not sure. That might have been the one. Like I say, about 8 different liveries banded together, and it was a good deal. Keep those questions coming. Let's see. I I could have made this thing much longer, but I didn't want to wear you out too much. Let's see. What was your favorite? Wait, just a minute. What was your favorite on-river French food? On river? I'm not quite I'm not sure what that one means, on river. Even though in Europe it's not uncommon to find things like cafes right on the river and stop for a beer or some good food. I just liked everything I got. But you know my favorite for dessert. But it oh, that came from Hugh. Well, if you elaborate what you meant on river, that's let's see, more from my Mike and Diana. uh, it's, we have a West Virginia Rivers Coalition anniversary celebration on Friday. The next morning, I get up bright and early and charge out there, and hopefully, I'll be on the river Monday morning. I got a shuttle driver lined up and an ambitious itinerary. I don't know if there's enough water in the river, but I'm going down it regardless. That's why the bottom of my C1 looks the way it does. Here's a question. Any new guidebooks, or are the best German ones still the best? Well, oh gosh, there is a great guidebook by Peter Knowles. I have no idea if it's still in print. It's in English because Peter is an Englishman. It's a guide to the Massif Central. It is my favorite guidebook of any in any country, including the United States. He's just an engaging writer. He writes about more than the river. He's not a neat sense of humor. It's Fluffy's Guide to the Massif Central. Look up Peter Knowles, Knowles. If you need more information, call me up or check in with me. I'll run to my bookshelf and give you every ISBN, whatever you want. But that's really great. Outside of that, German is the one I know. And seriously, I learned about 100 words, dirty, easy, hard, dirty, clean, pretty, ugly, things like that. And of course, the rating system, 1 through 6, and I get by. The main thing is you just want to avoid dewatered rivers and really bad places to get. Let's say, that was when I was there. Michael was hilarious and it's not. Like, did you bring lunch to eat? Unsure. You know, my life tends to be I'm trying to bite off as much river as I can chew, much less lunch. So often, like if the shuttle goes slowly, I I I don't have time to eat. It contributes to the ambiance for sure, believe me. And when I paddled with Carol, we did stop and we had the good life in France, but on my own, I'm my worst enemy. Also, sometimes that darn guidebook is wrong. I swear they were like off on distance about 50% on a section of the Meuse River in north, and I got off like 10:30 at night, which bad enough, but the restaurants closed at 9, so I went to bed hungry and no lunch either. Gosh. But you should do better. Yeah, treat yourself better. Try not to run as many miles as I do. I don't know if I missed any questions. Well, Susan,
Shall we stop the recording?
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, well,
Yes, questions. Come on. Questions. We need questions.
well, I guess I was thorough. Well, listen, I really appreciate again you guys tuning on into this. I have so many good memories from France, and the more people I can tell them to, before they run away, the better. So, and more rejected slides to show you if you ever want to see them. So,
Well, thank you, Ed. I really enjoyed your presentation. I always do. You're really good at presenting these stories and pictures.
well, thank you. And I'm sorry you couldn't hear the sound of the French frogs. They're definitely different.
Thanks, Ed.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thanks, Ed. Great presentation as always.
Well, we'll see you all on the river.
We'll see you Friday.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you, Ed, and see you contra dancing.
Good night, Ed. Thank you.
Oh, good night.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good night.